This is Between Realms and Reason, bridging the inner and outer cosmos, one conversation at a time. Here's your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. What if the world isn't what we've been told? What if the strange, the unexplainable, and the downright bizarre are not fringe, but fragments of a deeper reality, hidden in plain sight? In his book, Strange Paranormal Realities in the Everyday World, researcher Andy Thomas has spent decades tracking the threads that connect suppressed histories, unexplained phenomena, and patterns that the mainstream refuses to acknowledge. They're all here in this book. From time slips, ghostly apparitions, UFOs and crop circles to ancient mysteries, modern censorship and the silent war on truth itself, his work shines a light on what we're not supposed to see and asks, why not? If you've ever felt the official story didn't quite add up, you're not alone. And today, we're going to explore why. Andy Thomas, welcome.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
So you're a seasoned speaker, prolific author, and a researcher of unexplained mysteries, conspiracy theory, hidden history. You've appeared on the BBC, NBC, National Geographic, and you co-organised the Glastonbury Symposium. You also founded the website truthagenda.org. How did you get into this arena? What was it that triggered this interest in the paranormal?
Yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it, to see how people find themselves going down these rabbit holes. So,
Yeah.
I'd always had a sort of a general interest in the mysterious, but it didn't really trigger until 1991. And I was down in the West Country, and that was a year, especially when there were a lot of crop circles. And I, heard about them, never seen one for myself, but when I did, and when I was there, and everywhere you looked, there were more crop circles. There was something that kind of triggered in the pit of my stomach, really, and I just felt I had to get to the bottom of it. And I discovered there were people researching them, and I joined the research teams. And before I knew it, of course, suddenly there I was investigating not only crop circles, but all the related things around them. And next thing you're looking at UFOs, and then you meet people who are researching psychic phenomena and doing their own experiments with the circles. Whatever you think makes crop circles, what you soon realize is there's a lot of people out there asking questions about the world they're in. And that really set me on a quest to try to find out, well, what is this about? And why isn't the mainstream talking about it? And, you very soon realize, as I'm sure you're aware, that what you hear in the mainstream, it is so narrow, it doesn't fairly reflect what people really believe or what they really think. And there's much more to all of this than meets the eye. And so what I'm doing today in my lectures and the book Strange, it is to try to really get this out there now and say, these strange things are happening on a daily basis to a lot of people. And it really is time to speak more widely about them than ever we have.
So true. Did you meet Colin Wilson?
I have met Colin Wilson, yes. So he was someone, I can't say I knew him, but I spoke at various events and he came along and there he was. Yeah, all these classic researchers, there's people out there who've been trying to put this on the line for a while. What's interesting, though, is when you look back at sort of the 70s especially, there was a lot of more general interest, and you had people like in the mainstream talking about Uri Geller, and, there were rock stars talking about psychic phenomena and stuff. And it was big for a while. And then this kind of cynicism crept in. And then especially from the 1990s onwards, that was all pushed down and seen as something you didn't talk about anymore, only stupid people talking about those things, which wasn't true, of course, but that was the impression that the mainstream gave. And that's the sadness of it. There was a time when people did study these things with some seriousness, people who were respected. Now, like a lot of people don't realize when they watch, the Glastonbury Festival, that the Big Pyramid stage was originally co-designed by John Michell, who's a like, key esotericist and sacred geometer. And, even today their legacy lives on, but you don't hear the names. And
No.
yet once, these people did have
Mm.
great influence.
Yeah, I've interviewed Colin several times, and his story of, because he was one of the first people, he was a British telecom engineer, I
Well,
think.
you're talking about Colin Andrews. Now,
Sorry, sorry, Colin
Colin Wilson
Andrews.
is who
Yes,
I was thinking of. But
Colin Andrews. Yes, Colin
oh
Wilson is,
yes,
yeah,
but
another
both
one.
Collins have played a big role.
Yes.
And yes, and
Yeah.
Colin Andrews was a pioneer crop
Yes.
circle research. I mean, I've had my differences with him over the years, but I pay tribute to the work that he did
Yeah.
in putting this on the map, which he certainly did.
Yeah, indeed. So, in your latest book, Strange Paranormal Realities in the Everyday World, you open the book with the assertion that society is conditioned to reject the unexplained. You've just said that, back in the 90s, there was a lot more talk than there is today, and back in the 70s as well. What do you believe is the root of this resistance? Who benefits from it?
I mean, I think it goes back a long way. I think once we had the so-called Enlightenment 300 years ago or whenever, and people started to say, right, well, only the scientific material world is what you can gauge. So therefore, that's all that matters. I think that's where it began to go wrong. As we've just seen, there's there have been waves of interest, waves of acceptability, but I think we've suffered a lot in the last few years from scientism, which declares it has understood most things, and anything it hasn't understood, one day it will. But anything that appears to fall beyond that very narrow strip that they've declared is reality, they disregard it. And of course, there's two things about that. One, that's not very wise. B, that is not the scientific method. They're unscientific in the way that they deal with the paranormal and the strange, because you're not supposed to reject things without looking at them. You're supposed to investigate them, and they don't. And we've fallen into very much that pit of just
mind.
making fun of it, really, because it's easier. Whereas the harder but more interesting path would be to actually investigate it properly.
Yeah, but you don't think that there is a concerted effort to suppress?
Well, I do in certain areas. I mean, so if you read my books, Conspiracies or The New Heretics and other works that I've written, I think there's certainly evidence that there is a pushing down of the alternative in the mainstream media and amongst authorities. I think that's pretty clear. And there's certainly some areas you can clearly point to where we've been lied to without any question. So I think that can come into it. I think when it comes to the paranormal, though, I think it's sort of twofold. There might be some of that going on, and I know there are people that do believe that. But I also think that there is just an inherent, innate skepticism that's just in the journalistic world, never mind those in authority. And I think they've got so used to, we either can explain it or it's of no interest. They're not interested in speculative stuff. They want a story. They want something they can get their teeth into. And either they'll cover the paranormal just to have fun and show that we're all wacky, weird people, or they'll try to dismiss it because that is a story. The truth, which is when you look in the middle, there's a lot of unexplained stuff that we are going to have to spend a long time looking at to really come to grips with. That's boring, and they're not interested. And I think that's one of the problems that we've had. So I suspect there's many reasons as to why the mainstream does reject the paranormal, especially. But alternative thinking in general. But I think it's a habit, and it's a habit that should be broken.
You discuss phenomena like crop circles alongside Earth energy grids. Do you regard these as symbols, technologies, or consciousness triggers? Or all three?
Yeah, I think all three. Look, crop circles, for anybody that isn't aware of what's been going on over the years, I mean, they are these incredible patterns. Some are big and complex, some less so, but, some of them are beautifully laid down. We know some are man-made. Everybody gets that. Some people say, oh, you're all being fooled by blokes with garden rollers and all that. Yes, some are man-made. We understand that. However, there's many that you really cannot explain that way. And I learned that very quickly when I first started researching them. And 34 years later, I haven't changed my mind that, for every one crop circle you can show was man-made, there are some that, you've got to look at the rest of the evidence, the forensics, the eyewitness sightings, all kinds of things that go with this: strange lights hovering over the fields, biological anomalies occurring in the plants, incredible geometry, and so on. And you have to say, this is not straightforward. And you realize then also that wherever you think they come from, they are inspiring people, and thus they are triggering a new consciousness, wherever they even came from, even if that wasn't the intention. And you wind up realizing that, they cross many divides. And it's only through my experience with crop circles that I've been able to get such a broad view of paranormal phenomena. What I try to do today is to get that out there. So I give a lot of lectures to a lot of very ordinary folk. They're not as such interested in the paranormal. And what I've found is that when you can actually show them that you are prepared to take this seriously, they will often open up and then share with you an incredible story they've had, or a sighting or an encounter that often they won't have spoken about before because of all the mainstream suppression, and they're afraid of being made fun of. But when they actually realize there are people out there willing to talk about it, that is when they often open up. And that really is at the core of the Strange book. It's about getting down to these people's stories and putting them together and realizing that these recurring experiences are going on literally all the time.
I remember, if my memory serves me right, that Colin Andrews, in one of his books telling his story, he said at some point he did say these are man-made, and that got completely misunderstood by the media and caused a lot of problems, because from his point of view, he was talking about in the sense that our consciousness is co-creating with some other intelligence. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we should bear in mind some of the people that we do know have made man-made crop circles, albeit not in the circumstances under which many of them occur, and some have occurred in really short periods of time, by the way, when teams are taking many hours to make them, but maybe we'll come to that. But when you do talk to them, they will often tell you they felt inspired by some kind of higher force. There are some that will say they are working with some bridge of strange consciousness, and to me, that is no weirder than saying that an alien made it. And what's quite funny is that they often sort of don't see that. Well, you think, yeah, but that's quite a fantastic theory to have as well. But I can believe it. I think everything crosses over. And I think if you're truly inspired, then you are tapping into whatever you want to call it, the divine, the wider collective, And I think a lot of us do that without even realizing it. But that said, I think it's very clear that, many crop circles do come from somewhere else. And what that somewhere else is isn't straightforward. And that's why people are still debating them today.
And that's the point I think that he was trying to make. It's not like someone's inspired to go and physically make it. It was more a case of, because people want it in many respects, the unconscious is partnering with.
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, Colin certainly did say at one point that all 90% anyway of crop circles were actually made by people, but he's rolled back from that over the years. And yes, he's kind of qualified it a little bit more. At the end of the day, what he's touching on there, and anybody that studied crop circles for any length of time will know, it just isn't straightforward. It's really odd, and there's no clear answers to anything. It's all grey areas. And that is, of course, where, especially the media, they always put the boot in, because, as I said earlier, they want clear answers. And if you haven't got them, they're not interested in pursuing, just vague ideas. That's not a story to them. But it's not straightforward, and it is grey. And equally, that's one of the exciting things about it, that for once you've got something where you can't just have one person saying, I know all the answers. I mean, they do, but they never manage to prove it. It's unknown, and you have to embrace the mystery to get on with it. But I found that with a number of other mystery realms as well. You have to accept mystery, and then you can go from there.
Has anyone tried to decode, interpret them?
Yeah, I mean, over the years, there's been a lot of attempts. The problem is you never know whether you're right. Some
Exactly.
are very ambiguous, and
Yep.
it might look like that, it might look like that. Some are definite. There have been codes. There have been ones that have looked like aliens, others that have looked like religious symbols. There is a theory that something's throwing everything at us and then mixing it in with completely unknown symbols to see how we react. And of course, the way we react is very interesting, and it tells you a lot about the person that's doing the reacting as to what they believe, as to how they will respond to this phenomenon. But that is also true, and I've discovered that with UFOs and ghosts and out-of-body experiences and all these other things that I write about in Strange, because people will have different responses to them. It doesn't necessarily take you to an answer, but it's so fascinating to put it all together and try to see what is the bigger picture here.
If an intelligent force was behind crop circles or time anomalies, what do you think it might be trying to tell us or test us?
Again, I think that can only be speculation. I mean, some
What's
thought
your
for a
view?
while. I'd have no idea. I'm going to tell you now, right, for people that wonder what I believe about crop cycles, I have no idea what's going on. I never did, and I still don't. And actually, that's a really interesting position to be in, because I won't judge. And I won't judge your view on it. I won't judge that person over there on it. I'm interested to hear what all the views are, in the hope that it does all one day dovetail. I do not rule out that it could be at least partly extraterrestrial, extra dimensional. I certainly do believe human consciousness can affect them, because we ourselves did experiments back in the 1990s, and some of these get recounted in the Strange book, where we were trying to tune in to whatever was making crop circles to influence the patterns, and we did. And they appeared in places that we were hoping they might, or in unexpected places where it was to do with the work that we were doing. And you think nobody could have known we were going to be there. How did that appear? And we even got a formation that appeared in exactly the shape that we had predicted from one of our experiments. And we hadn't told anybody. And nobody outside of our very small group knew that that shape had been chosen. So what happened? Did something listen into our consciousness and think, right, I'll make that one? Or did we in some way interact
Yes.
with the
Yes.
wider, chains of events that were creating them to make that shape? But we learned, back then, and this was the mid 1990s, okay, there is an interactive force here. And this doesn't rule out lots of other things also being involved. But again, you realize it's all far more fascinating and much deeper than certainly anybody outside of the crop circle world would have you believe. And once you get involved with it, you realize what's involved. And a lot of people either go mad and they can't cope with it, or again, you embrace the mystery and the wonderful unknowing of it. And that's generally where you get further.
In Strange, you explore the phantom time hypothesis, the suggestion that centuries of history may have been fabricated or distorted. What do you think is more unsettling, the possibility that we've lost chunks of real history, or that we've unknowingly lived inside an invented one?
So I should say, I mean, I find that an interesting concept. I don't really write about that in a book at all, so I think that's perhaps come from somewhere else. Do I think that we've been told the whole truth of history? No. Is some of it actively withheld? Yes. It's getting harder these days to know what the truth of what's happening today is, let alone what happened several hundred years ago or 1,000 years ago. I have written about this kind of thing in the past. But, when I came to the Strange book, although I allude to things like that, I don't really spend too much time on it, because I wanted to get right down to people's actual paranormal experiences. And I start the book by getting it out of the way quickly and explaining some of the skeptical responses that I've had and some of the treatment I've been given by scientists and, very important people who don't like my views. and just to show that they don't actually have any answers either. It's an arrogant position they hold, and they get very angry when you don't agree with them. But in the end, you have to put them aside and say, right, we've all heard the skeptic explanations for these things. What I want to hear is, if the skeptics are wrong, what might be explaining all these different phenomena that the book explores? And that's exciting to me. And I had 3 people helping me with the book who are scientists or statisticians or physicists, but they're open-minded towards the paranormal, because I wanted to hear what they had to say. So they chipped into the book as well. And their views were very important, because these are qualified people. They're not nutters. They know what science is about, and they respect science as I do, but they also know that what we call paranormal today might well be the science of tomorrow. The
Yes.
paranormal is just science that we haven't yet defined. And that is something worth bearing in mind. Of course, there will be a scientific explanation for everything, but scientism that puts the door down and won't even look at these strange phenomena, that's where it goes wrong. And just to not even try to apply what they're learning already, that the universe is very leaky and weird, is, in my view, very foolish. And that much the book certainly does convey.
Tell me about time slips, timeline anomalies. I mean, do you think they're isolated incidents, or do you think they're part of a larger disruption in how we're meant to experience time itself?
What I find fascinating, if you look at like quantum research, and before anybody says it, yeah, I know you can use quantum to justify anything. However, there's no getting round it. They're showing that particles, at a tiny level at least, can move backwards and forwards in time. They can coexist in 2 spaces at the same time. You've got all this work, and time doesn't seem to play a role in the laws of physics, interestingly. It appears to go forward to us, but, there's nothing stopping it mathematically going backwards. And of course, some people think that it does, or at least it can fracture. Ghosts, apparitions, various comings and goings of entities that many people have witnessed over the years, and this may also cross over into what we call aliens and UFOs. I think what it all shows is that time and space does not run from A to B. It is leaky. I do not think that it is a solid thing that we've been taught. And I think that when it glitches, if you want to use a sci-fi term, glitches in the matrix, which was a good phrase used in that film, I think that's what we're seeing when we have a paranormal encounter. It's momentarily when the universe lets its front down and you get this little glimpse and something passes through. And it's obviously happening more than we know. So, yeah, I do think that what we're dealing with here is a universe that actually, if you stood back from it and accepted it was full of holes and doesn't work the way we think, paranormal phenomena actually becomes an inevitability, not just some weird quirk never to be talked about, which again, I actually find very exciting. And I think there are more and more people coming to that realization, even in the scientific world, but they're reluctant to admit it because they don't want to give any credence to the mystics who they've hated for so long. But I think in the end, they're going to have to accept there is a crossover and actually start to talk about this stuff more openly.
Yeah, I've lost count of the number of times in the last year that I've seen, headlines going through my news feed on my phone saying something's happened that scientists say that's impossible. That shouldn't have happened. We don't have any reference for this at all. So I think we're in a time where, with technology as well, we're going to be seeing all kinds of things that we never imagined.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's funny because it's after the book's gone through all the different phenomena and all the possibilities, non-skeptical, that could explain it. I mean, the last chapter brings it all together and says, well, what's the future of researching this? And actually, we're at a fantastic moment because there's many dangers to the technology we're currently creating. I think AI brings enormous social issues, and I think it's going to leave half of us, if not most of us, redundant by the other end of it. However, it also gives us much faster ways of processing data. If if anybody knows about this, what's called quantum computing, which is a much faster way of calculating things. If that gets going properly, it's in its infancy now, but a lot of people think that's going to spread. We're going to be able to calculate things that will take years to calculate, literally in seconds. And that's going to change the world. But it also means if you start to apply those processes to look at, say, the paranormal, I think it's soon going to find, well, yeah, hang on, look, there's clear patterns here. If you take the boundaries that we set for AI away and we remove the scientism and just say to AI, what do you think of all these phenomena? I think it's soon going to recognize there is something real going on. By the way, you can also apply that to things like conspiracy theories and things, again, that tend to get dismissed. And I think it will start to process data and say, well, actually, yes, that and that clearly need looking at. And it may well be that in future we begin to see that the paranormal is actually understood using these new calculation processes, using AI for the good, hopefully in this case. And I think what it will discover might surprise those that don't want it to discover that. And that I think is really exciting. And I think that the other aspect that raises is, listen, will a computer ever be psychic? Will AI, will computers discover actually how to replicate all these paranormal abilities we seem to have and psychic forces and that? Or will it turn out that only we can do that and that there is something unique about organic life and, the energy fields we're all bound up with? Now, that's the really fascinating debate, which the book kind of takes you to and hopefully leaves you with your mind blown at the other end of it. Because I think where we're going now with this research is going to take us to new places. And although the technology is an issue, equally, it's also opening doors to things we haven't been able to do before. And I think that's really going to be a very fascinating path to pursue.
Yeah. Have you had any time slips or anomalous experiences?
So, yes, back to time. Yes, is the short answer. It's funny, the Daily Mail got hold of this recently and ran a feature about it. It didn't necessarily put it across as I would have done, but you got the idea. I mean, when I was 12, so, young enough to be young, but old enough to know what reality is, one of my grandfathers was dying of cancer. We knew he was dying of cancer, but we thought he had at least a few more months in there. So my family, we all went on holiday. So my sisters, my mum and dad, and we were staying in this kind of static trailer. Okay. And then one morning, I looked out the window. I was in one of the bunk beds in the trailer, and I saw my mother coming down the path towards the trailer, and she was crying. And I immediately knew what had happened. She'd obviously just been given the news. So this pre-mobile phone, by the way. So she had to go to the farmhouse to use a phone and find out what was happening. Obviously, somebody had rung through. And sure enough, she came in and she gave us the news, and everybody was devastated and, crying. And I was just watching this unfold with great sadness and horror. And then I woke up. And it was a dream. Or so I thought. And it was real. Oh, thank God for that. That wasn't real. But then, and this is so vivid, I had this weird feeling. I looked out the window and there was my mother coming down the path. And then every single thing for about 3 or 4 minutes, not a few seconds, that I had witnessed in what I thought was a dream then unfolded in front of me. I knew exactly what everybody was going to say. And I was just waiting. And by now I was aware. It was hang on, it's not just deja vu where it feels a bit like this has happened before. I could predict, right, now my dad's going to say that. My sister's now going to say this. And they would. And it was actually frightening. And it was I don't understand what's happening here. So time was just repeating itself. And then it was is this going to keep going in an endless loop? And thank goodness it didn't. And then life carried on from there. But it's like I experienced that same moments or minutes of time twice. And I've heard from other people that have had this, where it's like something's glitched, but I've managed to maintain or retain my memory of what it was that I'd experienced. So yes, I have had a personal experience with that. And therefore, when people talk to me about time slips, I'm very open-minded to that. there's a number of stories in the book where this has happened to people. Now, some would argue some ghosts, when you see people in like old costumes or whatever, might be as much you slipping back into their time as them slipping forward into yours. I do think there are spirits that are more conscious, that know where they are now, and for some reason they're still lingering here. But I also think some are time slips. There's other things. There's a guy called Tony who I knew for years and respected, no longer with us anymore. And, back, I think in the 60s, he used to drive a bakery van and he'd go in and out of London. And one day he went into one of his normal areas where he'd go. And as he looked around him in the street, he said, "That's weird." And there were the ladies suddenly walking around in long kind of Edwardian dresses and very early cars, really old cars. And he thought, they must be filming a program or something. I must have walked into a film set. But the more he looked, everything transformed and the buildings were as they would have been back then. And he suddenly, with horror, realized he had gone back in time. And he also got the strong sense that if he got out of the car, he would get trapped in that time zone. And luckily, because he wanted to go and see what it was like. But he realized, if I get out, that's not going to be a good thing. So he just sat in the car, just watching this unfold. And then after a few minutes, suddenly that all dissolved away and the street went back to normal as it was in his time. I knew Tony. I know if he said that happened, it happened. And when you put that together with the other people who've had time slips and all kinds of very strange things to do with it, you realize again, that's okay. There's enough evidence here that we shouldn't just assume this can't happen. It clearly can happen. How, we can discuss and argue about. But the book covers that, because I think that saying that time and space doesn't run from A to B is a very helpful starting point in accepting that, okay, maybe strange things do occur.
Yeah. Peter May Chatwood calls those future memories, and she's had several of them. Yeah. Amazing. So tell me about stone tape theory. Now, I've never heard of that term before. I understand about, people talking about certain locations, sites holding energy imprints, but I've never heard stone tape theory.
Okay. Let's do a bit of cult TV history. So back in the 70s, you may remember, and some of you, if you're listening, watching, may remember an author called Nigel Neal. He created the Quatermass science fiction series, very famous.
Yes.
And he wrote various other things. And one of the things he wrote was a one-off play in the 1970s called The Stone Tape. And it was about a couple in the house, and they're doing building work in the house. And as they start to disrupt the fabric of the house, it starts to release these very strange supernatural happenings. He called it the stone tape because they conclude in that it's like the building has become a tape recording. In the same way you can store magnetic signals on tape, and now, of course, in other mediums. That's what they conclude, that basically there were memories, there were energies that got imprinted into that building that are now replaying because they're disrupting them. It's like they've released those forces. So he called it the stone tape. And so stone tape theory says that, yes, there are spirits, they can be independent, but sometimes what you're doing, whether it's to do with the individual giving off a certain energy and resonating with energies that are trapped in certain walls or the fabric of a place, or whether something else is triggering it and they just happen to be there, we can't say. But it's like something replays and you'll see a ghost. And it might be the kind of ghost that isn't aware of you. You just see it doing something that it was once doing. And what is fascinating there, and there's a lot of cases of this talked about in the book, is very often you'll get things that go round in a loop. People will see a ghost every 24 hours doing exactly the same thing. Or even once a year, there's a lady that saw this weird chap come up her garden path and then vanish once a year, every year, same day. And then you think, wow, that's really fascinating, because if it is the stone tape theory, if there is an energy getting triggered, what's triggering it? For the 24-hour cycle ghost, is it something to do with where the sun is? What would trigger something every 24 hours or every once a year? And yet clearly some things do. And it's like they're trapped in a loop. Now, you like to hope that they're not aware spirits doing the same thing over and over, being trapped, but we see that happening. For them, it was just normal. And, one of the things that I point out in the book is, like, if I go off now to make a cup of tea and you hear my footsteps going along the corridor, for all I know, time and space might take that moment utterly mundane and be playing that again in the future, where somebody either hears my footsteps or sees me walking up and down the corridor to the kitchen, and it's a ghost to them. But to me, it was just a normal moment that got glitched by time and space. And so I think there's many different causes of all of this, but certainly the fabric of places holds something. And there's a lot of people that say when you start to do building work, that's often when ghosts start to appear, weird things occur. It's like you've disrupted something that maybe was meant to be left there. And it doesn't always last. Sometimes in the end, it seems to dissipate. Other times, though, it can precipitate like huge occurrences, and you wish you'd never started the building work in the first place.
Yeah, it's a little bit like psychometry, isn't it? Like where people have objects and they seem to have, others can read them and tell you things about the previous owner. It's like the energy imprint somehow stays with the object.
I think everybody, everything that is alive imprints on the environment around it. I definitely believe that's true. And I think, again, why ghosts sometimes will have an affinity with a specific place or an object, because ghosts can travel with objects sometimes rather than a whole house. It's like they, at some point, presumably when they were alive, have imprinted onto that object, and there's some link, there's some bond. Doesn't mean they're there all the time, but it's like they can snap back to anywhere near where that object is. And I think especially when something very dramatic happens, and I have to say often traumatic, I would say many, not always, but many ghost experiences are when somebody has died in a very horrific way. And it's almost like it's been so sudden, so shocking that it's like their soul, spirit, call it what you will, gets released and they don't understand what's happening. It's happened so suddenly. And some seem to find it hard, especially if you listen to channeled sources who've tried to connect with ghosts that appear to be trapped. It's like they don't know where to go. They didn't do the transition to wherever we move from this state of existence to the next, and they're in this strange liminal halfway space. But it's often when there's been a traumatic death or quick, like a car accident or something. And I do think there is something, what I've realized, having, if you can, a good death, preparing, doing it as gently and as beautifully as you can, if you don't want to be a ghost. And obviously we cannot always control that, but I do think there's something to that, but especially when something really nasty has happened, where somebody died through murder or torture, you will often get the spirit there of somebody that seems eternally morose, sad, looking for somebody, looking for something, looking for rescue. But equally, right, to look at the brighter side of it, I've met many people who've met relatives that have passed and had perfectly good, normal conversations with them. They've had very beautiful ghost experiences, and seeing a loved one just there in front of them, smiling, hovering. And I'm well aware of what the skeptics say. Oh, well, you want to see that happen, dear, so you imagined it. Well, that's a load of old rubbish, because I've lost people I would have loved to have seen again. I never saw them again. Just willing something to happen isn't good enough. There have to be clearly a set of interlocking cogs to make that happen. And there's genuinely something going on in many cases. Yes, the brain can play tricks, but that cannot explain all of them. And especially, and this is something else that I really make a point of in the book, when you have multiple witnesses to a ghost.
Yes.
There's more of that than people think, or couples see them, or whole groups of people. Well, how are they all having the same hallucination? And clearly they're not. Plus, you've got visual images often captured. So this is where it all gets far more complex and, again, far more fascinating.
Of all the things, the different phenomena that you've explored, researched, experienced, what's your favorite?
Ooh. Maybe favourite's the wrong way to look at it. I'm fascinated by all of them. And obviously it started for me with things like crop circles and UFOs. But I think anything that makes people look beyond the normal, it can only be good. And in the book, I sort of list a top 10 of the most reported paranormal phenomena that I hear personally. And the book is based very much, and we do look at famous cases too, but it's about individual cases that I've heard over the years, because it's been such a brilliant straw poll of normal people, where I've met thousands of people over the years giving talks to all kinds of groups who are not biased towards this material in any way at all. It's such a fantastic broad spectrum to analyze. And the more I look at their stories, the more I realize that there are patterns. So number one on that list, ghosts, unquestionably. And by default, not always the same thing, but it can be poltergeists. Ghosts and poltergeists are the number one most reported phenomena to me personally. Number two would be UFOs, without any question. And I mean, yes, we all know you can see something and you think it's weird and it isn't, but some of these sightings are way beyond that. You know, there are, I mean, even the US military has now accepted there are things flying around that they cannot explain. So we know that now. What they are, we can argue about. But yeah, people have seen incredible things for many years, and often they're professionals. They're pilots, soldiers, sailors, police. These are not people that are going to make this up easily. And they know what flying objects look like, normal ones, and they know what is abnormal. So that's fascinating. But then psychic phenomena, you mentioned psychometry. I've met many people that can do that. Out of body experiences and near death experiences, which I think can be related. That's happening more than anybody seems to think. I have met so many people who've either during sleep or under an operation, under an anesthetic, have suddenly found this sense of being detached from their body and being able to travel and move independently. Now, you know, official medicine says it's a trick of the brain caused by blah, blah, blah. Well, yes, that could explain some, but there's others, you know, that's not correct. Because some, for instance, have explored other rooms in that state, come back, woken up in their body after the operation or whatever, and were able to very accurately describe to doctors and nurses things they saw in those other rooms that they were never physically taken into. That was something that kind of got researched for a while. Now, they didn't find any great data on it to absolutely prove it, but I can tell you, just from the straw poll of people that I've spoken to, that happens a lot. And you can't just keep saying it's a trick of the brain. It's clear to me we have the ability to project our consciousness. And again, even the US military now uses this for remote viewing to try, for espionage purposes, to project consciousness. Well, they must think something works. I know they don't talk about it openly. They deny it these days. But then we have whistleblowers like Lou Elizondo that's made it clear this is happening. And this guy's, again, a military man. And you realize, well, they obviously take it seriously enough. They know that we are not just a blob of flesh and blood only. There's another component to us that clearly can detach. And maybe, you know, what we quaintly call dying is just not bothering to come back into your body. And actually, your consciousness carries on fine and dandy, thank you, but not here. And again, I find that in a way rather reassuring.
Yeah. Tell me about the skull experiment. It produced mediumship phenomena under controlled conditions that defy explanation.
Yeah, I mean, so Skull was a series of experiments that went on for quite a few years, where a group of people were trying to prove that paranormal phenomena was real under some kind of repeating condition. And pretty much they did. Now, again, there are skeptics who say they all made it up. It was all lies. I think I've seen enough evidence to say to me that I don't believe that is the case. And anyway, even if you were to write the Skull experiment off, there's more than enough other people that have done similar work. And I know from my own work that I mentioned earlier that I was involved with this whole group of people here down in the Sussex area of England, is where I live. We ourselves experienced so many strange things. We were using channelers, we were using psychics, we were trying to get crop circles to appear. And although it wouldn't always do what we wanted, the amount of very bizarre coincidences and interactions that we had, and seeing strange balls of light while we were doing this work and having crop circles appearing, as I mentioned, in exactly the expected shapes and so on, told me there really is something to that. And certainly some of the psychics that we worked with, and a man called Paul Burer, who was, I think, incredibly gifted, again, no longer with us today, sadly, but I saw in him things that I simply cannot explain. I saw him do map dowsing. He managed to find a document that was being looked for by a member of my family simply by map dowsing their house. Right. And there's a longer story to that, which is given in the book, and things that are just beyond chance. And so when I hear the skull experiments sort of aficionados saying they did show that all these kinds of things are real, I don't have any doubt of that, because I've seen it happen for myself, again, with repeated results. And I've met so many other people that have done that too. And it isn't just skull. I mean, there's also, and this is mentioned in the book, there was the famous Philip experiment, where a group of Canadian psychics decided what would happen if we actually created a psychic entity. So we choose a character and a background for him, and we write his story, and we'll call him Philip, just to see what would happen, to see could anybody then channel that being. And it worked. And they found they could suddenly channel Philip. And of course, at first it was, oh yeah, well, we've decided on all this. But then Philip started to come through with information they had not written. And then other groups began to channel Philip independently. And it's almost like they had created this entity psychically that took on a life form of its own. Now, I discussed this in the book because I think that could explain a lot of things. Not to say it's all just imaginary. However, that when, again, you imprint, when you put energy towards something with intent and the force of consciousness, you are creating. It is an act of creation that can leave an effect on the world around you. And if anybody's ever done this experiment, and again, I've been present when this has occurred, where dowsers come into a room and say, right, I'm going to put an energy point there. And they use the rods or the pendulums. They say, right, there you are, there's a new energy point. And then they invite people in who were not in the room when they did that to find the energy point, completely randomly selected people, and they douse for it and they can find it. What that means is they have affected the energetic environment there. They've left an imprint that other people are then able to find. And that's so fascinating. And I think, by the way, we can argue forever about which religion matters more, which prophet's real. Well, maybe with enough psychic energy going into believing in them, they've actually taken on some reality, all of them on some level that you can communicate with, which is kind of quite fun because it means all religions are probably right and they're all wrong at the same time, which is brilliant.
Absolutely, yes. And in Tibetan, stories, we hear so often about tulpas that are created, energy forms. Yeah. Yes. I mean, there's many, reported stories about those. I find that quite fascinating. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we're bringing something into form by putting so much emphasis and energy into it. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I mean, of course, what that does is say that our abilities are not just about having little funny parlor games with this kind of stuff. That what you think is actually creating the environment around you. And when you hear people say, well, you get what you put in and you get your own reality, sadly, I think it's true, or happily. If you think you're a victim to everything and your life's a load of rubbish and nothing ever runs, you're creating that thought form around you, which thus attracts things that make you a victim and make life rubbish. Whereas if you were to find a way to break that, and actually say, no, hang on, I'm going to do a bit of creative visualization here. I'm going to rewrite that thought form. And, well, indeed, I've met people that have done it. You can turn your whole life around. What you emanate, you attract. And that is clearly some kind of universal law. And it's not black and white, but it is strong enough to know there's something to that. And if your life's not going well, yeah, you've got to deal with the physical circumstances, of course. But shifting your attitude is shifting your energy. And when you shift your energy, you're rewriting bits of the universe around you. The more the intent is solid and more powerful, the more you'll get an effect. And, as experiments have shown with random number generators and collective consciousness, the more people that do that and focus in on the same thing, the bigger the effect seems to be. And that is something that does appear to be recordable.
Yeah. When you're investigating all of these things, I mean, do you actually participate in seeing if you can create some of these things?
So the answer is yes. I mean, in as much as I don't consider myself a psychic, I believe we all have psychic abilities. And actually, it was only when I came to write Strange that I realized actually how many really bizarre experiences I had. It's funny because if you'd have asked me, I thought, well, I haven't had that much. But actually, when you put it all together, and the book's not about me, but I do recount some of it to show why I will take other people seriously. You realize actually there's more than I thought. And that's what a lot of people find. When you start to look at all this, there's more than you think. So I'm not a psychic, but yes, when I look at the experiments that I've taken part in, I have been a part of that. And I've been present when ghosts have been channeled and we've all, focused in. You're trying to call that being. I've been in haunted houses where there's a troubled spirit. And, Paul Burer, who I mentioned earlier on, he was very good at doing that. The person would speak through them and you would hear the voice speak through Paul, and Paul's face, his whole being would change. And some mediums, it's just voice mediumship or automatic writing. But, Paul would do the full kind of change. He would become that other personality. So you'd be in a room, then interacting with that personality and talking to them. So from that point of view, yeah, I mean, I've been present, lots of that. I've never managed to make anything materialize in the middle of the room. I've heard of this kind of thing. That would be exciting, or anything like that. But I'm open-minded enough to know that, it does exist, but I'm also wise enough to know there's people that do it better than probably I ever will do. Well, my role with this is to compile it, put it out there, and say to people, we should be looking at this because this is real. And by doing that also, it's, when you read the stories in the book here, of all the things that have happened to these people, it's exciting. It's like reading a novel, except for it's actually real. And it's, I'm very careful also never to sensationalize this. Because I could say, oh, yes, I've had all these things happen to me. And, oh, what amazing powers. I don't do that because that, I think, undermines it. All you need to do is say what happened. It will speak for itself. And that's the same with other people's experiences. I let them speak for themselves. I don't need to say, come in and keep saying, this is why this is amazing. It is amazing just by hearing what has happened to people. And I think that's important because we live in a world of sensationalism today, sensationalism and polarization. And they're two of the biggest, worst things about the world. Strip that back and allow something to be what it is. You find the truth more easily. You don't need to scream about it. You just say, hey, this is really fascinating, and see what you make of it. That's what I'm trying to do, with all these encounters in the book and the analysis of what that might mean. And it's certainly, even for me, just writing the book, it's given me a much clearer understanding of what I do think's going on in the universe, albeit a universe that I can't fully explain, but it's certainly, I've come out of it feeling that I've connected with it in that way. I'm not going to be the world's next super psychic or anything like that, but I think I've had enough experience to know now what's real and what isn't.
So it's changed your belief systems over the years?
Yes.
I mean, do you believe in, an intelligent force, consciousness, the universe, God, whatever people want to call it? That there is something bigger at play?
Clearly, there must be, I think, when you look at it. So I was brought up in the Christian tradition. That was my family background. And I don't regret that. I wouldn't call myself a Christian today, but you have to be open-minded to quite fantastic things to embrace some of that. And actually, it was good. It made me more open-minded. And I don't reject it, but equally, I just see everything now as joining up in the middle. I'm not an atheist. I do think there is a force of consciousness that somehow is embodied throughout everything that exists, whether it's God, as some people would call it. I don't know. But equally, I can't rule that out. And in the book, there is a section about angels because, again, I've had so many people say to me they've had encounters with angels. And I thought, well, I didn't want to get too into the religious thing. And it's not a book in any way espousing any one religious view, but equally I wanted to embrace it all. So I thought, well, okay, these are encounters people have shared with me. Let's share them. And then people can make of them what they will. And what I do believe is it's clear there are realms beyond this one and other dimensions where entities exist. And it's a bit like the Force in Star Wars, right? It's not one thing or the other, because especially some people that are rather fundamentalists, it's either they're all demons and they're angels. I don't think it's like that. I think there's a spectrum. And it's like the Force, you can use it for good, you can use it for ill, and there's grey areas in the middle. I suspect that's more how it works. But I do think there are forces that are much more on the positive side of that spectrum. We call them angels. And I think they can embody consciousness, and I suspect they can be called on. I can't prove any of this, but I don't have to prove it. There's enough people that feel they have that experience. And again, even if you just think they're therefore creating that through their own psychic forces, it's still real. And they're creating presences that have some level of reality. And I suppose that's what's really hit me is, okay, but that's still a thing. It's not nothing. So I'm not ever going to make fun of anybody's belief system. I might not share the dogma, and I don't like religious dogma. That's very troubling. But if someone says, well, this is what I believe and why I believe it, I'll always hear them out. And it isn't for me to say they're wrong, because I don't know. And as I say, one thing I have learned over the years is to be able to say, I don't know. And
Yes.
without any shame. It's not what journalists want to hear, because again, they want something
That's right.
definite. But it's, I think, far more healthy to be honest and not pretend you've got all the answers when you haven't.
I think the exciting thing is we're having our perceptions shifted all the time with all the new discoveries. I had mine shifted a year ago when I interviewed Alan Steinfeld, who'd put together a book with something like 13 experts around the world in UFO stuff. Nick Pope, Mary Rodwell, the Hertax. And one of the chapters talked about ultra celestials. And these were beings, they said, they were life forms, energy forms that lived on another planet, but they glowed and they were heartfelt. And of course, the obvious thing to say is, oh, you're talking about angels. And I don't
Yes.
think anyone has thought, or I certainly have never thought about angels as being, beings from another planet. So, but we put all these labels on these things, don't we? I mean, historically, they had to be something like, coming from God, because that's what people believed in. But
Yes.
it's so exciting to think that there is so much we're on the verge of discovering.
Well, I mean, there are other realms, and I think we've always inherently known that. And in the book, I make a point of saying, if you just look at ghosts, there's records of ghosts going back thousands of years BC. We've always known that something crosses over and comes and goes. Now, we didn't back then have the knowledge we now have of multidimensionality and what the universe was. So it was put into the only context that people knew, which was heaven and hell and, similar realms that a religious world would have. Now we're getting other perspectives. We're realizing that angels and aliens could be one and the same thing. And not only have you got other planets, you've clearly got other dimensions that seem to coexist with ours. Occasionally they cross over. And to me, in the end, you have to say that there are beings, and you see them in different states sometimes, and you see them come through in different ways. And sometimes people will see them as a ghost or an angel or an alien or whatever. And maybe sometimes they are very distinct, but other times maybe the lines are more blurred. And what is fascinating about UFO research at the moment is there is much more of a shift towards the spiritual consciousness aspect of it. Back in the 70s, it was much more nuts and bolts, flying saucers, aliens with ray guns. I think that really has shifted. And I think people are understanding that if there are beings that have learned to travel in incredible ways and, cross dimensions, there's a lot more to them than meets the eye. That very process must in itself either change you or it shows you are existing on a level where it's easy to do that. And so it isn't just one box of this is the reality of an alien. It's like something has learned to embrace various states of being. And I've really seen that change come in, even in the last 2 or 3 years. What that's doing also is taking some people into more religious realms. And there's a big shift, especially in the truth world, even in the conspiracy world, which I've written a lot about in the years past. There's a spiritual element coming through now where people feel they have to combat the darkness they perceive and the lies and, the misadventure of those that are doing that. And they need to align with something very overtly bright, very light and positive. So, they're evoking more the spiritual realms. Now, I personally wouldn't go towards a religious dogma. Some do, but I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to get like a team, a beacon they can hold up and say, we are the light. We're going to fight the darkness. So again, it's kind of a polarization, but isn't it interesting that it is happening? And so there's definitely a big crossover now with spirituality and, what we used to call paranormal phenomena. It's all one and the same thing ultimately.
Yeah. So if time can be manipulated or perceived differently under certain conditions, do you think memory is a form of time travel?
I mean, memory is the weirdest thing, isn't it? I mean, Rupert Sheldrake, who I'm sure you'll be aware of, for years, has been trying to get a wider look at what biology is and where consciousness lies. And I mean, one of the things he's always criticized official science about memory is that, so what they say is basically one part of your brain, when it needs a memory, it goes to retrieve the memory from the other part of the brain. But he points out, well, hang on a minute, if you've got those two parts of the brain, if that part of the brain knows what memory it's looking for to go there and get it, why does it need to go there and get it? It must surely already know it. And he says that doesn't make any logical sense. And he is much more of the opinion, as a number of researchers are now, that, the mind, consciousness, and memory actually exist in a far greater sort of vat of consciousness. We certainly do seem to have our own individual thread within that. But a lot of people think, we do intersect with something much wider. And, the analogy that's often given, but I think is a good one, is like a radio. Okay, the radio is just a box. But if you turn it on and you go through the different frequencies, you can pick up all these things that are just traveling around there in the ether. They don't exist in the radio. All you're doing is tuning into it. And I think there's much more of a move towards that consciousness and memory is somehow out there already, and we dip into it. It's like you're tuning the radio using your brain. And I'm not saying the brain plays no role. We've clearly got a physical being. It serves some purpose. I think there is a crossover between the two, and I discuss that in the book. And yet, if this stops, consciousness doesn't, and probably memory doesn't either. And that's when you come into like beliefs like the Akashic records.
Yes.
That everything that happens is in some way preserved, it's recorded. And actually that may well be how it is, because every thought you ever have is in some way an electrical pulse in the brain. But we now know electricity leaves imprints on other realms too. So it's multi-layered, and it may well be that somewhere anything that ever happened is recorded and could, if you knew how to tap into it, be tapped into. Whether you'd want to tap into all of it is another matter, but certainly some of it, it would be really fascinating. And so, there's always been predictions we would one day rediscover this, or the Hall of Records would be uncovered, and all of this. Maybe it will be, but it's not. I think we've always thought that'd be some great big room under the pyramids or something, and there are claims about that. But, I suspect it'll be a far more sort of esoteric, non-physical experience, and yet doesn't mean it's not tangible.
Yeah. You've written several books, and you said before we came on air that Strange is the one you've always wanted to write. What stopped you writing it sooner?
So I've alluded to all this before, and I've written about paranormal phenomena on my book, The Truth Agenda, some years ago, did a lot of looking at that kind of thing. I think I needed many more years of talking to people. And I realized the moment had come when I thought, hang on, I should be writing these down. Um, and I realized people are telling me incredible things. This is an incredible glimpse into everyday people's realities, and it's getting lost. So I thought, right, I'm going to start to maintain them now. So there's two things. Number one, if someone told me something incredible, I would say, would you please email that to me? And sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't, and they'd go on the record, and many of those are in the book, written accounts. Others, what I will do, if somebody tells me something and you're in a room and there's too many people, you've got to record it then and there. As people tell me something, I've learned to imprint it in my own mind. So if they tell me, say, about a ghost they saw somewhere, I actually have to flicker the word ghost up in front of my mind's eye, and then they'll say they saw it in like Fulham or something, or wherever it was, and I'd have Fulham, ghost Fulham, in a shop. And therefore, what that means is when they've gone, and when I usually leave the venue and sit in the car, I can actually remember the rest of the story bound together with those key words. And then I will talk it into my phone. So I'll dictate it into the phone, then eventually turn that into text. And it's a very accurate way of doing it because I do this literally minutes after I've heard it. And I've had a lot of feedback on that, where if somebody has then emailed me later, it's 99% accurate, which is really encouraging. So I'm not making these stories up. These are real stories. And after I'd done this for a few years, I thought, okay, it's time to tell these stories now. But I needed to get them down. I needed to record enough different encounters to see how they were falling into patterns, to see, therefore, how I could share this with the world in a coherent form. And I don't think I would have been ready to do that some years ago. I was doing it in my own way with different things and writing a lot about conspiracies and cover-ups, and rightly so, because we do need to talk about that. They're not all real, but some are. We need to get down to understanding that. But the paranormal, it's kind of a harder sell on one level because it's not so tangible. You can't argue about did that plane hit the building or not. It's on some other realm. And yet there is enough evidence and eyewitnesses and some physical evidence. Crop circles would be a good example of that. Unusual, but that's a good example where you can make a case. So the Strange book is a culmination of 34 years of research, but certainly the last few years of recording these and coherently saying to the world, I think they fit into these categories, but equally they cross into that one and that one. Isn't that really interesting? What does this mean? Well, here's what it could mean, and talking about that. And look, if you're familiar with the paranormal, you'll find that the book gives you a lot of brand new material you will never have heard before, but equally it hopefully will give new insights. If you're new to it, right, this is a book to start with because I wanted it to be really accessible to everybody, not only paranormal researchers and aficionados, but also people new to it. So it's written very accessibly in a way that everybody can come to it and understand it very easily. And from the feedback that I'm getting, I'm really pleased. Apparently I've done that, and that was always the hope, because by doing that you go beyond the choir. It'll reach out to people that are new to this, and we need to do that so they know they're not alone. That's an important point.
Well, you raised your book Conspiracy, and that was going to be my next question, because in that you explore the mindset of those labelled conspiracy theorists. What did you discover about the psychology of people who question official narratives?
So some of you would have heard this Radio 4 program with this wonderful presenter called Mariana Spring, who's been sort of born of this journalistic, rather sort of intellectual snobberies of the world, where she thinks she understands everybody. So she puts out this stuff about why people that believe in conspiracy theories are wrong, and how they're misguided and all that. And look, sometimes she's right, but she misses the point because she doesn't know these people. She doesn't understand them. She has no comprehension of why they care and why they do question and why they believe the things they believe. I do, because I've been a part of that world, and I have for a long time gone through those phases. And I've gone through moments in my life where any conspiracy theory that came my way, I would immediately think, oh, well, that must be true, because how could somebody say it if it wasn't? And then I learned as the years went by, actually, I do need some evidence. We need to discern here. We need repeating evidence. We need to see how this feels in here. And, through my experiences with trying to embrace crop circles without judgment, I in the end applied that to conspiracy thinking. And I thought, okay, I don't always know whether the conspiracy theory you're telling me is correct or not, but I'm fascinated that you believe it, and I want to understand why you believe it. And I mean, understand, so that I can then sit with that and see how it feels. And then my previous book, The New Heretics, I actually put forward very practical ways we actually can get closer to the truth and how you can sift it. Because you can send you mad when everybody left, right, and centre telling you to believe this or this. It can have very detrimental effects, and we see the effects on some people with that. There are ways through it, and I've then therefore come to this point of writing about, okay, how you deal with all this stuff. You don't need to go mad, and you don't need to put up with the rubbish from the skeptics either. Yes, they sometimes have a point, like always, but they're not always right. And there are certain areas where we definitely should be talking about the evidence. But the problem we've got is everybody's got polarized. And the worst thing you can do if you believe in a conspiracy theory is to be effectively shaking your fist saying, you must believe me. And if you don't, you're working for the other side. That's just not helpful to anybody. And anybody on the other side of that is just going to shut down. So don't do that. Just say, okay, well, I respect your view, but there are reasons why I believe what I believe, and here they are. And if you want to spend the time looking at them, I'll happily share them with you. And that's the way to approach it. In the end, we choose our truths, all of us, based on a certain amount of evidence, but it's not always that convincing. We choose. But the more evidence you can stack up in your favor and really know what it is before you start blabbing about it, the stronger you'll be in conversation. And if somebody does combat you, and yeah, of course, not only in the world of conspiracy theories, you're going to get skeptics attacking you, but in the paranormal world as well. And so that was another reason why I thought, I'm not ready to write this book 10 years ago, but I had the idea for it. And I realized when I started to write this 3 years ago, yeah, I'm ready to do this now, and I know how to deal with it. And people can take it or leave it. If they don't want to believe it, they don't have to. But these people do believe it happened, and I want to understand that. And I think that it's happening enough times, all these stories are being told enough times to say, yeah, there's a repeating reality here, and you can't just keep dismissing it all. So the years of researching conspiracy thinking. And you can say theorist, by the way. There's nothing wrong with theorizing about a conspiracy. I know it's used as a term of abuse now, but sometimes you need to theorize. Well, what's wrong with that? But my years of dealing with that have put me, I hope, in good stead now for dealing with this. And again, trying to create a bridge to those that just deny all of it, to those that are trying to speak their truth to be heard. And hopefully it'll do some good. I hope so.
You have on your website, you give away 3 of your earlier books that are out of print now. People can download them for free. Tell us a little bit about that before we close.
Yeah, well, one of them, I tell you what triggered putting them up for free was I mentioned the psychic experiments we did with crop circles and seeing balls of light and all of that. And I realized that, I mean, I had written about that with Paul Bura back in 1997, my very second book that I ever wrote. So the first book was about the crop circles of Sussex. Great little, roundup of what had been happening for a few years there. But the next book, Quest for Contact, that I wrote with Paul, it told the exact story of what we did and went into a lot of detail about the experiments we did, where we went, why we did them, how they didn't always work, when they did work, and when incredible things occurred. And I realized the book had long been out of print and nobody was ever going to be interested in reprinting it. And I thought, you know what? I would like this story to be available to people so that if they read Strange and think, God, this sounds really interesting, I want to hear more, they can. So they can go to the website and then you can download. So Fields of Mystery, my first book about Sussex crop circles, then Quest for Contact, and then a later book I did called Swirled Harvest, which is a compilation of articles I've written about crop circles and UFOs and other phenomena too, because again, they're out of print. No one's ever going to reprint them. And I thought, well, I got permission from the original publishers to use them. I thought, great, here they are for free. So yeah, there's 3 free books, and they're not written as I would write them today. In my ideal world, I'd rewrite every line, but there's an honesty to them, and they record things that happened that I think mattered, and there's a rawness to what happened then. It's not a rewriting of history. This was written in the moment, and I think that's hopefully where they're valuable. So yes, if you go to my website, truthagenda.org, and just click on the books page or look through the news stories, you'll find them. You'll find 3 books of PDFs
Nice
to
gift
read.
for those that want to look at the history.
Indeed.
Yeah. Andy Thomas, thank you for joining us today.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
Before we close, what if the strange things that we call anomalies aren't rare glitches, but signs we've been looking at reality through the wrong lens all along? We like to think that we're rational creatures, but the truth is we're deeply uncomfortable with anything that doesn't fit our tidy models. So we dismiss, downplay, or mock what doesn't conform. But maybe the real mystery isn't what's happening. It's why we keep ignoring the evidence that it is happening. That's it for this week. We've been discussing Andy Thomas's latest book, Strange Paranormal Realities in the Everyday World, published by Watkins Publishing. You can find more information about all of Andy Thomas's books, his research, work and events on his website at truthagenda.org, where he actively explores how cover-ups, ridicule and institutional power shape our understanding, not just of politics and history, but of the paranormal, psychic phenomena and suppressed energies. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another edition of Between Realms and Reason. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Andy Thomas.
If today's conversation sparked your curiosity, you'll love our other shows. The Synergy Sessions, where leading-edge thinkers collide in bold, unscripted dialogues that ignite new possibilities. Between Realms and Reason, where we journey into the mysterious consciousness, energy, and the hidden layers of reality, where science converges with spirit in ways you've never imagined. And the No BS Spiritual Book Club, where leading-edge new thought speakers, teachers, authors, and luminaries who've walked this path before you share the 10 books that had the biggest impact on their life journey. All 3 shows are available on YouTube, Spotify, Substack, and all major podcast platforms. For more information, visit sedgbeer.com. That's SEDGBEER.com.